we had said that the two differences between deductive and inductive arguments is, first of all, deductive arguments are arguments where the relationship between the premises and conclusion is logical, but that is not so for inductive arguments. Secondly, deductive arguments are arguments that present you with only one possible conclusion. And that's because the relationship between the premises and the conclusion is logical. And then for inductive argument, you are not guaranteed a single conclusion because there's no logic involved. So those are the two key differences. One, logical relationship. Two, whether the conclusion is one or more than one. So I want you to keep remembering those two differences. Today we're going to talk about causal reasoning. Causal reasoning is a kind of inductive argument. So right now I'm going to share the screen so that we can see the causal reasoning slide. So causal reasoning is a type of inductive reasoning that focuses on causal relationships. Causal relationships. So that's the focus of causal reasoning. Reasoning from cause to effect, and sometimes from effect to cause. What causes what? How do we know it is a cause? So, but we have to begin by understanding different senses of the word cause. When we say something causes something, there are different things we mean. It's not always the same meaning of the word cause. There are different senses of the word cause. Now, first of all, we have proximate cause. Proximate cause. Proximate cause is the immediate cause of something, even if that thing has more remote and foundational causes. Proximate cause, the immediate cause of something. Example, Samson decided to become an armed robber. He put him in a situation where he engaged in a shootout with the police, and the police killed him. So, the shootout to the police is the proximate cause, immediate cause of Samson's death. So that's what proximate cause means, an immediate cause. Then we have contributory cause. Contributory. A contributory cause is a cause among many other causes. Example, a distressed economy contributed to Samson's decision to become an armed robber and hence to end up being killed by the police. So apart from the shootout with the police which killed Samson, there are other causes of Samson's death. First of all, why did Samson become an armed robber? To make it possible for him to be shooting with the police. So a distressed economy which frustrated Samson's efforts to get a job contributed to his death. It's one of the causes of Samson's death. Then we have necessary cause, or cause as a necessary condition. When something is a necessary condition for another thing, then without it, the other one will not exist. If something is necessary for something else, then that thing that is necessary is a necessary cause. Example, without oxygen, life is impossible. So that if there's no oxygen, there cannot be life. So oxygen is a necessary cause. Then we have sufficient cause, or cause as sufficient condition. That something could be a sufficient condition for an effect if the presence of that thing is adequate for the presence of the effect. One does not need to express doubt at seeing the effect when she sees the condition. So if something is enough for something else, then such a thing is a sufficient cause, something that is enough, not something that is necessary, but something that is adequate. Example, to be prevented from inhaling oxygen for 20 minutes is sufficient cause of death. So if you don't get to inhale oxygen for quite a long time, let's say 30 minutes, then it is adequate for you to die. And so the difference between sufficient and necessary cause is that something can be a necessary cause, but it's not sufficient. For instance, oxygen is necessary for life, but oxygen is not sufficient for life. To have life, you need more than oxygen. You need other things. You need oxygen, water, food. You need so many other things. You need air. You need sunlight. So, sufficient cause is a bit more complicated compared to necessary cause. There can be a lot of necessary causes for something, but none of them is sufficient for that thing. Another example of sufficient cause, proving that a healthy and sane person calculatedly committed a murder is an adequate condition for sentencing the person to life imprisonment if this is the appropriate sentencing for such a crime in that jurisdiction. So once you are able to prove that someone committed murder with his full state of mind, in a healthy state of mind, with a full intention, and the person does not have a psychiatric problem, that is sufficient, for sentencing the person to the punishment for homicide. So that's another example of a sufficient cause, that you have proven beyond doubt that this happened, this person did this, and then the person has to be sentenced. So we can have individually necessary and jointly sufficient conditions. We can say there are several individually necessary conditions for an effect, and that a combination of these conditions becomes sufficient for the cause, for the effect. So that's what I said earlier. We can have several necessary causes, but none of them is sufficient for a cause. In order to have sufficient cause for something, then probably a good number of necessary causes will have to come together to constitute a sufficient cause. In life and in science, it is usually difficult to determine what number of causes are jointly sufficient for an effect to occur. Okay. For example, you have oxygen, water, food, and health are independently necessary conditions for a human being to stay alive, but they and some other factors we may not know yet are sufficient for staying alive. So each of these things is necessary, but is it sufficient? The answer is no. So to have sufficient conditions for life, you need to bring them together: oxygen, water, food, health, so many, and we are not even sure what we need as sufficient condition for life. That might be difficult. That is difficult, and probably it is impossible. Otherwise, we will be making life. So that's the difference between necessary and sufficient cause. Then we have probabilistic cause. Probabilistic is the opposite of necessary cause. This kind of cause is theoretically not necessary. It's not a must for the effect. For example, a crisis within the economy, the lack of a job, the need to marry and settle down are probable causes of Samson's decision to become an armed robber. So none of these causes is necessary for Samson's decision to be an armed robber. In fact, most of us, many of us, also grew up in a crisis-ridden economy. We didn't have a job. We needed to marry and settle down, but we did not have money. But many of us did not become armed robbers. So none of the causes is necessary. They are all probabilistic causes. Then we have causal agent as cause. Causal agent. A causal agent is also a cause. Causal agent. In that case, you are talking about a human being, for instance. Example: Clement is a cause of the crisis. Then we have causal chain and causal web. Causal chain is when there are so many causes, each one leading to another. When there is a chain of causes, from one cause to the other, and then to the other, and so on. That's a causal chain. And then for causal web is when the relationship is when the relationship between causes is more like a web than
I can't hear you clearly.
So two contributory causes could occur simultaneously. So when you are talking about causal web, then automatically you are talking about contributory causes, because two or more of them could be occurring at the same time. That's a causal web. But so let's look at examples. Example of causal chain. Now, Samson graduated but did not find a job. That's the first cause. He didn't find a job. Then he attempted self-employment but did not show enough determination to succeed. See, so from finding a job, he went to self-employment. It didn't work. That's another step in the causal chain. Then he went to a bar one day and met a friend who introduced him to a gang. That's the next step. So you can see one cause leading to another. And then Samson agreed to join the gang because he was hungry and out of cash. He joined the gang and became an armed robber. So you can see there's progress. Then he and his gang had a number of successful robberies, but in one of those robberies, they ran into the police. Then it led to the next effect. There was a shootout, and Samson was hit. Then from there, Samson was rushed to a hospital where he died of gunshot injuries. So this is a chain of causes which began from unemployment down to dying of gunshot injuries. That's a causal chain, So, what about causal web? So you see how causal web differs from causal chain. In causal web, a number of things are happening at the same time. It's not one leading to the other. It is several contributing to an effect side by side, It could be that the police officer who killed Samson did so because he, the officer, aimed his gun correctly, whilst his colleagues did not. And at the same time, Samson got killed because he squeezed his trigger to kill the police person before the police person killed him. But he found that there were no more bullets in the firing chamber of his gun. So you can see these things were all occurring at the same time. The policeman was trying to shoot Samson. At the same time, Samson was trying to shoot the policeman. The difference between the two is that the policeman had bullets, but Samson did not. So that's a causal web. Okay, so a little exercise. I can trace Nanado's victory all the way to an advice his father gave him when he was a child. This is an example of a proximate cause, contributory cause, probabilistic cause, causal chain. Okay. So you can see the answer, that's causal chain. Now, USA has a hand in the ousting and killing of Patrice Lumumba. USA has a hand in the ousting and killing of Patrice Lumumba. This is an example of a what? Proximate, contributory, probabilistic, causal chain. Now, when you talk about having a hand, automatically it tells you there are other factors. So your answer would be contributory cause. You need to at least pay a house rent if you wish to live in that house. You need to at least pay a house rent. Is it contributory, probabilistic, necessary, sufficient? Paying at least, when you hear the phrase at least, then it means it is necessary. It's a necessary cause. Then, are you aware that the lady you dated is the reason why you did not do well in your exams? So, a lady is a causal agent because we are talking about a human being. A lot of factors contributed to the emergence of the idea of multiculturalism. First, World War II ended with the defeat of the Nazis, who wanted to conquer the world and put everyone under a single ideology. Second, it was the era of independence, and most former colonies were acquiring their independence, which was a message of equality and mutual tolerance. Third, African Americans in America were demanding for respect and equal treatment. And then fourth, the United Nations had made a declaration on the fundamental human rights. So all these factors were contributing to the idea of multiculturalism. You cannot say they were leading one from one to the other. They could all have been occurring at the same time. So that's an example of a causal chain. She died because she drank a heavy dose of poison. She died because she drank a heavy dose of poison. She drank a heavy dose of poison, and the heavy dose of poison was enough to kill her. So you're talking about sufficient cause. Okay, so any questions at this point? Now that we have seen the meaning of the different senses of the word cause. Do you have any questions? Carlos, your hand is raised, and then Samuel Ajay.
Yes, please, when we were talking, because of the lack of connection, your voice wasn't coming that clear.
Oh, okay. But at least were you able to?
Yeah, we were able to get some things that you said.
Okay. But I'm hoping that you heard it was at least loud enough for you to be able to comprehend the individual words.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So Samuel Ajay, or was it Samuel that just spoke?
Yeah, I just spoke.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, so we're just about to go into causal reasoning proper. We just finished discussing the sense of the word cause. So, any questions before we go ahead?
Is there a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So I actually have two questions. The first one is, what is the clear difference between contributory cause and then causal chain and then the causal web?
Causal web, yes. A contributory cause is one among many causes, but a causal web is referring to all the causes involved. You understand that?
Okay. Then,
Yeah.
sir, the second question is the first brain teaser we did before the rest, the one with regards
Yes.
to Anado.
Yes.
Sir, please, why isn't the answer rather is it probabilistic or something?
Let me see. I have to go back. I can trace Leonardo's video all the way to an advice his father gave him when he was a child. This is it's it was suggested as a causal chain because that advice would have set off a chain of events that eventually gave him victory. He might have been working with that advice. And when you are working on advice, when you're working with a certain advice, then you are behaving in certain ways, and that behavior will be generating effects. So those effects will be one effect becoming a cause for another one, and it just continues until you probably achieve what the advice was meant for. You know.
Sir, please, as you said in your speech, you said he might be acting upon the advice. In that case, that word you use might makes it more of a probabilistic cause, because even if it did, it could or could not be necessarily one of the factors that kind of contributed to his victory.
Yes, my using the word might be in disagreement with the exercise itself, because you can see from the exercise that it reads, I can trace Nanado's victory all the way to an advice his father gave him. So that suggests that he was actually working with the advice, not that he might have worked with it.
Exactly my point. So let's say I said it. Let's say you said it. I can also say that it is not necessarily he being advised by his father that's kind of contributed to his victory. I can also say that probably it is because he's been working hard underground. That is why he was able to win the election.
Yes, but that would
So
mean
yeah,
you are stepping outside the assignment, because you need to work with the materials given to you in the assignment. And this assignment is presenting you with an advice as something that led to Ronaldo's victory. So you don't disagree with the assignment by saying, no, it did not lead to his victory. That will not be how to answer it. The assignment is saying that the advice led to his victory. And then the assignment is asking you, what type of cause is that advice?
okay.
So if you choose probabilistic cause, you are indirectly saying that the advice did not may not have caused his victory. But that is not how the assignment was framed. If the assignment was framed to suggest that it may or may not have caused it, then that will give you room to choose probabilistic cause. But if you look and see that the assignment doesn't give you room to choose probabilistic cause, then you have to choose the next one that is reasonable.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Then let me stop the sharing and see. I just want to see something in the slides before we entered the main causal reasoning. Yes, go ahead.
Please, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Please, I didn't get what the individually necessary and jointly sufficient conditions were.
Individually necessary and jointly sufficient. Let me see. So I will share the screen again, and we would. Individually necessary and jointly sufficient conditions. So we can say there are several individually necessary conditions for an effect, and that a combination of these conditions becomes sufficient for the effect. So, and I think there was an example. Yes, example: oxygen, water, food, and health are individually necessary conditions for a human being to stay alive. But none of them is sufficient for a human being to stay alive. So that is the difference, the major difference between necessary and sufficient.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sir, please, can you come again on the proximate cause?
Proximate is immediate. The closest cause of something, the closest and clearest cause. What killed Samson was a bullet from shooting by the police. So that's shooting by the police. You understand? When you're talking about other things, sorry, let me mute everyone. When you're talking about other things that caused Samson's death, such as economy, unemployment, none of those things is the proximate cause. The proximate cause is that he was shot. That's the proximate cause. So that's the most simplest way for you to understand proximate cause. That Samson was shot and he died. He died of gunshot injuries. So that's the proximate cause.
Okay, thank you.
Sir.
Yes.
Sir, last one on this issue. Can we can we say that any cause at all at any point in time could be a probabilistic cause?
If you say that any cause at all is a probabilistic cause, then you are saying that oxygen is a probabilistic cause for human life.
What I'm saying is that provided the other types of causes you are talking about, there isn't any 100% certainty in it, then it turns out to be a probabilistic cause.
Yeah, the thing is, I think I get what you are thinking about. I think you are thinking about the possibility that some other causes could also be probabilistic causes. For instance, some contributory causes could also be probabilistic causes. And which other one? It's possible that some other types of causes are also probabilistic causes, but the one that is not a probabilistic cause is a necessary cause. A necessary cause cannot be a probabilistic cause, because if it is not there, you won't see the effect. So there's no room for one. But
okay, see.
The other kinds of causes can possibly be probabilistic cause. Contributory causes could be probabilistic cause. Although some contributory causes will be necessary causes. A contributory cause for human life is oxygen. It is necessary, But you can see that some contributory causes to Samson's death are probabilistic.
So,
yes.
Okay. I don't really understand why the first brain teaser is a causal chain, because it only created one advice for his reach. The first one.
Wait. Give me a second. Let me check my my sound controls. I want to see if my laptop output volume is, I think it's at the highest. So you are going to have to be louder so that maybe it's because there is a little noise around my my area. Okay, so what were you asking?
Okay, the brain teaser we were discussing earlier. I said I don't understand why it is a causal chain.
Yes, causal chain.
I don't understand why it is a causal chain, because it only stated one advice for his victory.
You mean why the advice is a causal chain?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. The advice dates way back. So, but if he has been working with that advice for years, then obviously he's been taking actions that have been leading to other events. And those events have progressed to a point where he has gotten what he wanted. And without that advice, he wouldn't have gotten that victory. So because that advice is way back, and that advice has been, determining his actions, series of actions, all through the years. You can say that is an example of that. So probably it's difficult to see it as causal chain because it is just one step in the series, and other steps were not identified. So other effects down the line were not mentioned. It's just the advice that took place many years ago. But I think that if you rely on,
but those series of actions were not stated.
Yes, the things that happened between the advice and the victory were not mentioned. But if you're going to have to rely on that, then it could be tricky identifying something that is a causal chain if the examiner actually meant it to be a causal chain. So you have to look out for a chain of events. A chain of events for you to know it's a causal chain. But apart from a chain of events, if it is not a chain of events, if it's just a single event, an advice, you still have to ask yourself if it looks like a causal chain. But then we can leave that example for now, and I'm sure you are not likely to get that kind of remote question. So I think we'll be a bit more explicit if we want you to identify causal chain. Okay, so let's go ahead and complete. So we're done with that exercise. Now we've seen the different senses of the word cause. We now have to look at the different types of causal reasoning. We have what we call the informal causal reasoning patterns. Now, causal reasoning is a type of inductive argument attempting to establish the causal relationship between phenomena or events. So, causal reasoning is focused on causal relationships. A causal claim indicates that something causes another. That's a causal claim. Then, a causal hypothesis is an initial speculation made in relation to a causal claim, a supposition offered as a starting point for further investigation. That's a causal hypothesis. So now we're supposed to study two things. First, we're supposed to look at various informal causal reasoning strategies for arriving at causal claims. How do we arrive at our causal claims? When we claim that something caused another, how did we arrive at that? And then we're supposed to study the various experimental strategies for confirming causal hypothesis, but not for this semester. So we're not going to look at that in this class. That's a more advanced study. So we're just going to look at one thing in this class, the various informal causal reasoning strategies for arriving at causal claims. So let's look at them right away. John Stuart Mill, in his book titled The System of Logic, espoused 5 approaches or described 5 approaches for detecting causation by observation. 5 approaches, and we shall study just 3 of them. Our interest is relevant difference reasoning, common thread reasoning, and concomitant variation reasoning. So we'll look at these three kinds of causal relationships. Or let's say there are the 3 kinds of, the 3 ways to identify a causal relationship. Now, relevant difference or relevant difference reasoning. This is a method of reasoning that identifies something that occurred differently from others as the cause of an effect. Identifying something that occurred differently from others as a cause of an effect. A is the difference among others, so A caused the effect. Example, I've always taken tea and bread for my breakfast, but on a certain day last month, I fell sick shortly after my breakfast. I treated the illness and fell sick again last week after my breakfast. I asked myself why I've fallen sick on these 2 occasions after breakfast. And then it occurs to me that on those occasions, I had taken a product, a marmalade, with a breakfast. Then I checked the information provided on the marmalade container, and I see that the thing expired long ago. So I suspect that this is the reason why I've fallen sick twice. Since I've always taken tea and bread without health implications, it means that the expired marmalade becomes the relevant difference in explaining a possible cause of the 2 illnesses. So the scenario here is that I have always taken tea and bread for my breakfast, probably all my life, and it's normal. I don't get sick. All of a sudden, when I take breakfast, I fall ill, and I ask myself, why is the same breakfast that I normally take makes me ill? And then I ask myself, is there something I added to my usual breakfast? And then I remember that I added something to my breakfast. I probably went to a supermarket and bought something I'll be putting on my bread. So I check it and I see that it's expired. So naturally, I will say this is a cause. How did I arrive at that cause? I arrived at that cause because I have always taken tea and bread all my life. So the natural tendency is for me to ask, what is happening differently in this breakfast? And then my mind goes to that marmalade that I bought to be adding to my breakfast. So that's relevant difference reasoning. The method of reasoning that identifies something that occurred differently from others as the cause of an effect. A is a difference among others, so A caused the effect. Then we have common thread reasoning. This is the method of reasoning that identifies something that occurred in all the instances that have led to a particular effect. All the instances. Method of reasoning that identifies something that occurred in all the instances that have led to a particular effect. A is a common thread among all the events. So A is the cause. For example, now when I bought that mandate some months ago, I had gone shopping in the company of my neighbors, and we had all bought the same thing, the same stock of mandate in the same supermarket, which expired at the same time. So assume my neighbors are equally sick. They all trace the cause of their illnesses to the expired marmalades. It means we have all identified the expired product as the common thread in all the cases of this particular illness in the neighborhood. So that's an example of a common thread. So if I was not the only one who bought that marmalade, I actually bought it in company of my neighbors. And then I find out that all my neighbors fall sick after their breakfast, or they fall sick whenever they take it. Then we have identified that expired marmalade as a common thread running through all the cases of this illness in the neighborhood. So you can see that common thread is somehow a progression from relevant difference. If, for instance, there's an epidemic or a pandemic, there's an epidemic in a community, the first thing to do is to get one sample from that community and test him or her for what is the problem with him or her. So you are going to have to test what is happening differently in that person. What foreign body has entered the person's body? That would be the relevant difference. Something that is not supposed to be part of that person's body is in the person's body, and you are trying to identify it through laboratory tests and all that. So if you identify it as a virus, maybe a coronavirus, then you start asking yourself, is this the same problem with all the other people who are suffering the same thing? So because you've seen the outcome of this investigation, what you could be doing for the other cases is not to start asking the same question afresh. What is happening differently in these people? And then you start looking for relevant difference in the others. No, you wouldn't look for relevant difference in the others. You just go ahead and test them straight away to see if they have this virus that you've discovered in this person. And then if you confirm that they all have the same virus, then you say, okay, this virus is the common thread running through all those suffering this epidemic in the community. So what you've done is to begin with finding the relevant difference in one sample of the population, and having found it, you determined that it is also the common thread running through all those who are having that problem in the population. So relevant difference and common thread often go together in investigations. When we go to concomitant variation, this is a method of identifying a degree of occurrence of something rather than its simple presence or absence. Now, remember that when we are looking for relevant difference, we are looking for the presence or absence of something in an environment. The same thing with common thread. But when we're talking about concomitant variation, we are dealing with something that is part and parcel of the environment, something that can never leave. But maybe it is causing a problem because it's present in a particular quantity it shouldn't be. For instance, if carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is causing a problem in a particular place, then you wouldn't say that it is the presence of carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide is present in all atmospheres. You will say that it is the degree, the intensity, the volume of carbon dioxide that is the problem, not the mere presence of carbon dioxide. You can't eliminate carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So that is where concomitant variation comes in. It is a method of identifying the degree of occurrence of something rather than its simple presence or absence. It is used when we cannot eliminate a particular cause from the environment, example, carbon dioxide. It is useless to use relevant difference to identify carbon dioxide as cause of ill health. So we use a method that measures its degree or intensity, and that's concomitant variation. Example, it was revealed through research that high blood pressure is exacerbated in regions whose soils have low levels of selenium. Low levels of selenium. This is a metal that exists in tiny quantities in every soil, and because of this, we cannot measure for its absence or presence. We can only account for the effects of varying degrees of it, and hence the discovery that it seems correlative with the ability of our bodies to keep our blood pressure normal. So the simple idea is that selenium is present in every soil, but if the quantity of selenium in the soil in a particular region is too small, then people living in that area will be having high blood pressure. So that's the research. Second example, it was discovered that high levels of sulfur dioxide pollution in the air was responsible for high rates of deaths in London between November and December 1952. Now, there's no way to eliminate sulfur dioxide from the air. So the experiment discovered the causal connection by comparing the increase and decrease of the effect, which is number of deaths per day, to the daily variation in the degrees of sulfur dioxide fumes in the air. So sulfur dioxide is part and parcel of causing problems. So if you want to know whether sulfur dioxide is causing a particular problem, a particular health problem, then you'll be measuring for its degree, not its presence or absence. And then you would already know the degree at which sulfur dioxide is okay or healthy. And so you'll be measuring whether the degree is a healthy one or an unhealthy one. So, a little exercise. Kofi has had accidents with 6 of his cars in the last 3 months. A single person has had accidents with 6 cars. Is an example of what? Relevant difference, common thread, concomitant variation, false common thread. So in this case, it's identified as relevant difference because that sorry, I think I have a little cold. So Kofi is the very clear explanation in these accidents. Okay. There is an unspoken understanding that those who were trained in European and American universities are better equipped for their jobs and should be given more promotions. This is an example of what? An unspoken understanding that those who were trained in European and American universities are better equipped for their jobs and should be given more promotions. This is an example of what? Relevance, difference, common thread, concomitant variation, false common thread. And so the idea here is that being trained in a European or American university trains you better. And so that means that that is what is running through all those that are being identified as better trained. You know. So it's been identified as a common thread. Your computer is more likely to last longer if it is an Apple product. It's an example of what? Relevance, relevant difference, common thread, concomitant variation, false common thread. Your computer is more likely to last longer if it is an Apple product. So why does it last longer if it is an Apple product? Obviously, because Apple makes their products more resilient. There is a quality in Apple products that is more than the one in other products, which makes it last longer. So what would that be? So it's identified as an example of concomitant variation because they are all computers, but this particular computer has something more than the others. So it will be better to choose concomitant variation because what makes it last longer than the others is obviously because a certain material, the material used to make it is more fortified, you know. So that there is a higher degree of something in Apple products that makes them last longer. Okay. One of the reasons why Michael succeeds where others have failed is that he studies his problems carefully before taking action. Why Michael succeeds where others failed. This is an example of what? Relevant difference, common thread, concomitant variation, false common thread. So that's relevant difference. You know. Male soccer teams from Cameroon are always filled with tall, hard-bodied men. My father said it is because of the prominence of plantain, a key provider of zinc, and the average Cameroonian diet. You know. So would you identify this as relevant difference, common thread, concomitant variation? So you can choose common thread, or at least that's what was suggested in this exercise. It has been discovered that living longer is associated with low protein intake at middle age and moderate to high protein intake in old age. This study is actually done by Levin et al. So this is an example of what? Relevant, difference, concomitant, variation, common thread. So low protein intake at middle age and moderate to high protein intake at old age. Now, so first of all, everyone takes in protein. So the issue in this study is not whether you take protein or not, but at what degree you take it. So you have to choose common concomitant variation. Okay, so that's that about relevant difference, common thread, and concomitant variation. Now, those are three of John Mill's 5 descriptions of 5 ways in which we reason informally about causes and effects. But there are certain ways we identify causes that we should not. So sometimes we identify causes in a bad way, or we identify the wrong causes. So there are some causal fallacies or fallacies of causal reasoning. We call them bad causal reasoning. These fallacies are committed when the link between an alleged cause and effect depends on a causal link that does not exist. So let's look at some of these causal fallacies. Post hoc ego propter hoc. This is a fallacy of inferring causality from chronology. Example: for the first time today, I took beans for breakfast, and I performed wonderfully in my mathematics text. Therefore, a breakfast of beans is very crucial to mathematical proficiency. So this argument is that because I'm taking beans for the first time in my breakfast, and I did very well in a mathematics test later that day, the beans must have had something to do with the mathematics performance. So just because something happened before something else doesn't mean it caused it. So that's a fallacy of post hoc ego propter hoc. When you say, for instance, that the president and the vice president had an argument, and that argument, after that argument, there was drought. There was an economic recession after the argument between the president and the vice president. Therefore, the disagreement between the president and the vice president is the cause of the economic recession. So if something has happened before something, it is not enough to say it caused it. You have to investigate to confirm that there is a causal relationship. So concluding that just because something occurred before another thing makes it the cause of that thing is a fallacy. That's what we call the post hoc ego propter hoc. You don't just say that something caused something just because it happened before it. Then we have non-causal pro-causal, or the fallacy of exchanging or confusing cause for effect. Example: Michael is a poor student because he performs poorly in examinations. So when you say that a cause is actually an effect and then the effect is actually the cause, that's non-causal pro-causal. Michael is a poor student because he performs poorly in examinations. But the correct thing is that Michael performs poorly in examinations because he's a poor student. Oversimplified cause. Oversimplified cause is when there are many causes and then the argument identifies only one of them as a cause. Example: the Cameroonian team won the trophy because their coach is paid a higher salary. So that's an oversimplified cause. So you would say that the high salary alone cannot make a team win a match. Otherwise, every country will be paying their coach millions, all kinds of crazy amounts. But that doesn't win a match. It takes more than a coach's high salary to win a match. The coach has to motivate the players. Irrespective of what a coach is receiving, if he's not able to motivate the players and to get the players to perform, then they can't win a trophy. False common thread. When we infer a common thread as a cause when it is not. Example: all the academically bright guys in my class have cars, so I'll get a car as part of my desire to be academically bright. So yes, even if you identify having a car as a common thread running through all the guys that are academically bright in your class, it still doesn't mean that having a car is what makes them academically bright. It could just be accidental that they have cars. Well, what this fallacy is saying is that you need to investigate more to confirm that the car they have is contributing to their academic brightness. If, for instance, you are able to find out that the cars they have prevents them or spares them the agony of a 3-hour journey to campus. So if you're able to establish that the car helps them to get to campus, and whilst other students have to trek for 3 hours to get to campus to study, and the 3-hour daily difference, tips academic performance in their favor, then you can say yes, that having a car contributes to being academically bright. But if you're not able to establish such things, then you cannot say that having a car is what is responsible for academic brightness, just because those who are academically bright have cars. Confusing correlation with causation. Just because two things occur together does not mean there's a direct causal relationship between them. Example, each time a car moves, we see smoke coming from the exhaust tube. Therefore, the smoke causes the car to move. But that's not the case. The smoke is not what causes the car to move. Both the movement of the car and the smoke are caused by the engine combustion. So the fact that two things always happen together doesn't mean that one of them is causing the other. Then we have slippery slope. Slippery slope is when we suggest that a relatively insignificant event will cause a more significant event, which in turn will cause an even more significant event, and the order of significance continues to increase without adequate justification as to why each significant event will lead to a more significant event. So what we have is that a progressively dubious chain of premises, which are usually consequences, is often employed to support a conclusion or claim. Okay, let's look at another explanation of slippery slope. Is the fallacy of saying that if A is allowed, it will trigger a set of events that eventually lead to Z. And it's only a matter of time to go from A to Z. So this should not be a fallacy if the causal movement from A to Z is justified. But it is a fallacy if the causal movement is not justified or is not even justifiable. So, for example, if Donald Trump becomes the president, America will fight many wars. Now, during the US presidential elections of 2016, some Democrats were actually telling American voters that if they allow Donald Trump to win the presidency, that the USA is going to be involved in a lot of wars because the man is obviously aggressive. He doesn't mince words. He doesn't shy away from a fight, and he's actually looking for who to contend with. But you can see that it didn't happen. So now you can say that that argument was a slippery slope. Second example, it is wrong to believe in God because then you will eventually believe in not just God, but all kinds of spirits. And then you come to believe that spirits have all kinds of power, which is superstition. And then you come to believe that inanimate objects have spirits, which is animism. And then you probably will come to believe that everything has spirits and power to do something or the other. Yeah, but this could be argued to be a slippery slope, because believing in God doesn't necessarily lead you to believing in all kinds of spirits. So believing in God, which is theism, should not necessarily lead you to superstition and even to animism. So that's a slippery slope for those who argue against believing in God. Then the third example, I cannot allow my child to go outdoors and play in a compound. This is because if I do, she will jump fence and run into the streets. If she runs into the streets, she will run away with a stranger. If she runs away with a stranger, then I'll never see her again. If I never see her again, I'll be miserable for the rest of my life. If I'm miserable for the rest of my life, I'll commit suicide. So for the purpose of the avoidance of suicide, I will not allow my child to play outdoors in my compound. So you can see a long chain of causes being adduced as the reason why something should not be allowed to happen. You see, so you can say it's a slippery slope because you can allow your child to play in a compound and she wouldn't jump the fence. And even if she jumps the fence, it's possible she will jump the fence and she wouldn't run away with a stranger. She will still come back to the compound. So there's no reason to believe that all of these things will happen if you allow her to play in the compound. Okay, so a little exercise. I noticed that most of the great people in this country attended the Achimota High School. So I will attend that school because I want to be like them. This is an example of what? False common thread, oversimplified course, confusing correlation, causation, relevant difference. Okay.
False common thread.
False common thread. Most of the great people in this country. So now, there was a time when there were just a few schools, Achimota High School and maybe 2 or 3 other ones in the whole country. So, of course, it was unavoidable that all the great people in the country were coming from Achimota and maybe 2 or 3 other schools because they were the only schools available. Now there are so many schools around and they are producing a lot of great people. So continuing to identify Achimota as the school responsible for the great people might not be correct. Russia's military is more powerful than the terrorist organization because the military destroyed the organization last week. This is an example of post hoc ego propter hoc, non-causal pro-causal, confusing correlation with causation, slippery slope. So you can say it's a non-causal pro-causal because Russia's military, the ability to destroy a terrorist organization is not what made Russia's military more powerful than the organization. You would rather say that it is because you rather say that it is because Russia is more powerful that they destroyed the organization. So Russia did not. Russia is not more powerful because they destroyed the organization. Russia destroyed the organization because Russia's military is more powerful. I remember you visited a native doctor in January. That must be the problem behind the problems you are having with your business. So it's an example of a post hoc ego propter hoc. A non-causal pro-causal, confusing correlation and slippery slope. So you say it is post hoc propter ego hoc. For all you know, these things might just be accidental events. It's possible that these native doctors don't actually do anything. They just assemble some funny looking objects, put on some funny clothes, and then sit down there looking like deities so that when you come, they'll tell you, please, I need so and so fees. All he wants could be just the money, and the rest is drama. So there's no basis to conclude that when you go there, there are some powers that are unleashed to either make your business better or worse. Okay. You can attribute Gabriel's success as a lawyer to the support he receives from his wife. This is an example of false common thread, oversimplified cause, confusing correlation, causation, relevant difference. You can attribute Gabriel's success as a lawyer to the support he receives from his wife. So that would be an oversimplified cause. Of course, the support of Gabriel's wife played a role in his success as a lawyer. But the support from his wife alone cannot make him a successful lawyer. If his wife is supporting him and Gabriel is not serious, he cannot be a successful lawyer. So he himself has a role in his success because he is serious doing what he should do to be successful. And then he also has the support from his wife. Each time I win a game of chess at the club, I happen to have mistakenly used the wrong key to attempt to lock my front door. So whenever I mistakenly use the wrong key to lock my front door, I know I will win a game of chess at the club. This is an example of what? False common thread, oversimplified cause, confusing correlation with causation, relevant difference. So that's confusing correlation with causation. Even if they are correlating, it doesn't mean that there's a causal relationship between them. Okay, so any questions? I think we've spent more than our time. So at the end of this class, I'm going to have to upload the video so that those who couldn't attend would watch. So Carlos.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah, please, the just ended the example. This last example you gave.
Yes. Yes.
Uh-huh.
Winning a game of chess and using the wrong key to lock the door.
Yes, sir. Can you, isn't this looking more like a false common thread?
False common thread. What is the thread? And what is the thread running through? What are the things that the thread is running through? So the thread and what it is running through.
Yeah, so that is anytime he plays the game chess, he happens to mistakenly what? He happens to mistakenly unlock his door with the wrong key. This has become a constant thread. So meaning anytime that happens, then it means he's going to win a game of chess.
Yes, so I see what you mean. You're arguing that it could be a false common thread because mistakenly unlocking his door is something that runs through the cases of his game of chess.
Yes.
So I think an argument could be made in that direction because it looks like it looks close to that. But another angle is that you will see that the two events always happen at the same time. They happen the same day. So they are correlating. When you see one, you see the other, and maybe the unlocking of the door happens either before he goes to the chess or after he comes to the chess. So we don't have information on whether it is before or after. If it is before, then
we
you
do.
say, okay, maybe, let me see. Each time I win, I happen to have mistakenly used the wrong key to attempt my. Yeah. So is it before the game or after the game? So whenever I mistakenly use the wrong key.
First of all, this is
Looks like it's after.
Yeah, so it looks like it's before. So whenever I mistakenly use the wrong key to lock my front door, I know I'll win a game of chess at the club. Now, yeah, but this second sentence is his conclusion. that he knows he will win. But that conclusion is not the event. The conclusion or the decision or the conclusion is based on some events he has noticed. But we don't know if those events are, if in those events the locking is before or after. It could be that it's some are before and some are after, and then he concludes that anytime he locks it before, he'll win. So that aspect of the information is not very clear. But what is clear is that both of them happen the same day, so it means they correlate. That's why confusing correlation with causation is suggested as an answer.
Sir,
Yes.
sir, here I don't from the question and then from the text. It is not saying that it happened just one day. It says each time, that is not more than it has happened more than once, and it's
Yeah.
happening more than
I'm
once
not,
makes it
yes,
a trend.
happened one day. I'm not saying it happened one day. I said each time it happens, each time they happen the same day. I'm not saying they happened in one day. What I said is that each time they happened in the same day. That is the wrong key and the winning of chess happen in the same day whenever they happen. So they might have happened a number
So
of
is that
times.
a trend?
They might have happened a number of times on different days, but they normally go together on the same day.
Is that
Yeah,
not a
so
trend, sir?
yeah, so I think it is good to, this example is showing you how to navigate between common thread and the correlation causation. So you need to look at it very well to see which one is the case. All right. So I'm going to have to upload this recording so that those who have one problem or the other can watch it later. Our next class is informal fallacies, which is Wednesday next week. And so we have seen formal fallacies when we studied deductive reasoning. And then we saw causal fallacies today. There are some inductive fallacies, but we don't have enough time in a semester to look at different inductive fallacies. So, but next week we'll look at fallacies that are neither deductive fallacies, nor causal fallacies, nor inductive fallacies. That's why we call them informal fallacies. There are fallacies in other areas of argumentation. All right, so I'm going to have to stop the recording and